Good afternoon and good evening. I'm David Weinstein, Director of Camp Tel Yehuda, and welcome to almost 500 people from the Young Judaea Nation here tonight and this afternoon. This past summer, as many of you know, Tel Yehuda didn't open because of COVID for the first time, and we had a little online Reisfield to work in T-Wi-Fi because Zoom was not made for Mel, and Mel was not made for Zoom. How could one have a bombastic opening on Zoom? Impossible. I was thinking of one for today. Couldn't come with a bombastic opening. There's no shock from within and shock from without on Zoom. That quiet voice he would use sometimes when he wanted to emphasize a moment, people would just be writing in the chat, speak louder, speak louder. And imagine for a moment, everybody, if we put Mel on mute on Zoom. This is the way I imagine that going. Hey, Weinstein, he always called me Weinstein. Why the fuck did you put me on mute? Turn me off mute. Yaffa, why are they putting us on mute? There's also no physicality here. And we know Mel was so physical. You can't punch somebody across the Zoom box. You can't arm wrestle. And of course, no basketball and no cheating. And mostly, Mel just would never fit into a two-dimensional little Zoom box. Not figuratively, not literally. We may try today to do this in little Zoom boxes, but it would never work with Mel. To me, Mel was first and always Gil's dad. Gil and I were at Sprout Lake together in 1976 and 77. And I first met Mel at Gil's bar mitzvah at Temple B'nai Abraham. And I didn't care anything about his dad, just like we didn't care about those kids' dads. We just wanted to get whiskey sours. He was just another one of my friend's parents who I'd ignore at a bar mitzvah. But a few months later, I was in Youngest Alumim, Chug Yoya, 1978, Tel Yehuda. And Gil's dad was my Marquez. He was older than my own parents, but this guy was not like any of the rest of those suburban New Jersey dads. He could never fit into a Zoom box. I've been blessed since then, like all of you, to have Mel in our lives in New Jersey, in Israel, and of course at Tel Yehuda as my Marquez, teacher, colleague, inspiration, and friend. Like so many people on this call right now, we're almost at 500. He changed the trajectory of my life, and there's no question I would not be the director of Tel Yehuda today. One thing we all learned from Mel is to cut it at its high point and leave them wanting more. I have no doubt that by the end of today, we will all be leaving here wanting more Mel and more of each other. Today we'll honor Mel on Zoom, a place that he did not belong. I want to turn this over and introduce Mike Berman from the Great Eunice region and Tel Aviv, and currently the president of the Young Judaea Global Board of Directors. Mike?
Thank you very much, David. And first of all, condolences to the Reisfield family. I was at the funeral of Mel in Jerusalem this week. It was a very emotional and difficult time for everybody. I was the Shliach Tzibur for the entire Young Judea community. The outpouring of condolences and sadness at the funeral and in our community conveys how deeply indebted we all are to Mel. He was a giant, had a profound impact on thousands of people, and over decades of dedicated work as an educator, leader, and activist, he impacted all of us. He was a role model for all of us. The last gift that we can give to Mel is our resolve to continue on his path of working for Klal Yisrael, Tzionut, and Tikkun Olam. We are his life's work. May he live on through our continued dedication, hard work, and accomplishments. I'm quite certain that he would be pleased and thank us for this gift. And then he would probably shout a big fuck you to everybody. For anybody who is interested, I will put out a shameless plug that we have created a Mel Reisfield Memorial Fund Proceeds from this fund will go to the Mel Reisfield Education Institute for Young Judea, and of course, the Mel Reisfield basketball court at Tel Yehuda. We'll be sending a link as a follow-up to this Shiva to everybody who registered. So thank you all very much for joining us, and let me turn it back to David.
Thanks so much, Mike. So today, through most of the rest of today, our madracha will be Andy Meisel's, my teacher and colleague and friend. Andy was recently described to me by Gil Troy as the Mel Whisperer, and I think that's a pretty apt term. She first met Mel as a student at Temple Ben Abraham and in the Livingston Young Judaea Club. She worked for many summers with Mel at Tel Yehuda as a Merekezet of Ulpan and as the drama director, putting on all those amazing plays on Friday night, which we have no recordings of singing in Hebrew. And later on, as the director of Tel Yehuda and the director of your course and the Shlicha back to Young Judaea. And I could think of nobody better to be taking us through this as our madracha today. Andy?
David, thank you. I'm glad I had a few minutes after those slides. I have notes. Mel wanted you to talk spontaneously. I'm sorry, and he wanted the bombastic opening. Mel, today, I'm sorry, no bombastic opening, and I'm following along. I appreciate what you noted, David. I want to say that the greatest honor was to have been invited in as a bat bait with Mel and Yafa at their home, and to carry that relationship and friendship with me. And it's an honor right now, and it's honor of my life to be connected. I keep getting muted and unmuted. Can folks hear me? I don't want to repeat myself. Did I say anything? Did anybody hear anything? Okay, sorry, technical difficulties, because again, Mel, this is Mel saying, yeah, the Zoom thing, no, NG, no good.
We heard everything except for the last 5 seconds.
Okay, well then it doesn't matter. That's a way of saying, that's Mel saying, move it along, Andy, stop it already, move it along. Before we go any further, I want to also thank the Reisfield family for giving their blessing to this gathering, to Sharon, Gil, Shai, granddaughters Naama and Rose, the extended family, all the friends who are family, people who are Mel's children in spirit, but today we really want to thank Mel's children for sharing your dad with us for so many years. And even now in your grief, your generosity in sharing him with us again and allowing us to join as a community to talk about him and to think about him. We lovers of Mel, we selfishly needed to be together. We all know that this is for us, but we truly hope that in sharing our loss with you, we mourn with you, we grieve with you. And in this global Beit Am, maybe we can bring you some small comfort. May you be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Sharon, I know you wanted to say something. We'd like to ask you to unmute and share some thoughts with us.
Thank you for that, Andy. Following what you just said, all I really wanted to say was thank you to all of you. The last Young Judea event I accompanied my father to was is Tel Aviv in Israel. And Gil Troy warmly expressed his thanks to the Reisfields. He knew I was sitting among you, but also to Gil and Shai, for sharing our father with all of you. And we have a small family. We're dispersed all over the world. But I just wanted you all to know that despite the corona, despite the fact that very few have physically come to visit, I feel so not alone. So today I'm thanking you for sharing your wonderful memories with us. And it's helping me get through this tremendously. And I'm sure I speak for Shai and Gil as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. When we get toward the end, if you or Gil would like to say something else, please, we will make that happen. Before we go any further, anyone who knew Mel, anyone who spent time at Tel Yehuda knew about his great love affair with his wife, Yafa, Zichrona Livracha. And in fact, without Yafa, we would not have had this precise Mel that we had. We lost Yafa about 2 years ago. And here, as we gather as a Young Judea community, and even though today we're focusing on Mel, we very much have Yafa, the wonderful, the incomparable Yafa in our hearts. So please, let's all together just take a few minutes of silence to think about Yafa. Yafa, Atitanu. So here we are, today or tonight, wherever you are. We're at a day that we all knew would eventually and inevitably come, but it's still impossible to believe. It's only a few days after losing Mel. This is still the week of Shiva. It is still incredibly raw. It's still very fresh. So even though we're in these strange times and using this crazy new device of Zoom, we'll do what we do at Shiva. You know, just get your own stale cookies and coffee. But we'll feel close. We'll support the family. We'll support one another. We'll talk about Mel. We'll share what he's meant to this YJ community that he so loved. We'll laugh a little. We'll cry. We're also going to hear Mel's voice. We're going to see Mel's face. And because it's Mel, we're going to sing. So let's be together in this virtual Chadar Ochel. And of course, obviously, goes without saying, it's the Aleph Chadar Ochel. Maybe it's one of those times when like debt came over to Aleph and we were all crammed into the one Chadar Ochel, but it's the Aleph Chadar Ochel because that's Mel's house. That was Mel's house. I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do in the next time that we're together. We're going to hear today from a few speakers, not a tremendous amount of speakers that represent different dimensions of Mel's life and work in Young Judea and at TY. If I started to give you the professional accomplishments and bona fides and the initials that come after all these people and the various things they've done in their professional life, we'd be here, you know, for a year. So we're not going to do that. And nobody in that group had any problem with that. And they were very happy to share their Young Judea resume. People were very excited. No, oh, don't forget, I was also with Chanicha and Opan, and I was also, people are very proud of that. And I know that for all of those great accomplishments, all those people will say, well, you know, Mel had, you know, I know that for me. Everything I've done professionally is because of Mel. But today, we're all Mel's Chanichim, all of us. And so, as we heard earlier, in all of these people and in so many others and in everyone here gathered, we know that Mel's legacy lives on. I just want to say another thing. We could have had a week of gatherings. We could have done this 7 times. We could have had a roster of 10 speakers each time, each with phenomenal, wonderful, eloquent people who were dear, dear, dear people to Mel, and who would have been completely appropriate for the occasion, and you all know who you are. But that would still never be enough. It will never be enough. We'll never have the time to say all the things we want and all the things we need to say about Mel. I do know that the terrific Young Judea team that's helped us with this will be planning some additional opportunities, and they'll be collecting thoughts. I see that people are already sharing your feelings and your condolences in the chat, so please feel free to do that. We're going to share the chat we're going to save it and share it with the Reisfields. There'll be 2 parts to today's gathering. The first is this more structured program. Now, if you ever had Mel yell at you at camp, you know that he appreciated, I'm talking staff-wise, he appreciated timing, pacing, choreography, and building to the drama. It's not that he appreciated it, he demanded it, right? And if you didn't move it along, you know, you got yelled at. And whether it was a sicha or a hatzaga or a tekes or in shira, it was planned and it was structured And so to honor Mel and what he taught us, we're keeping things tight and we're moving things along. Mel would want us to cut it at its peak. That said, we know that there are so many people who are really feeling tremendous pain and feeling the loss. So after the more formal program, we're gonna leave the room open, and we'll have a more informal, though somewhat moderated, opportunity for people to share. Finally, and then we'll really get going here. There are multiple incredible, gorgeous, beautifully crafted and emotional and from the heart tributes and sentiments that are posted online. If I start to name them all, I will leave someone out, and I don't want to do that. One is more moving than the next. And again, the Young Judea folks will be collecting and sharing those links. And they're also building an archive of photos and videos dedicated to Mel. I do want to point out that the official obituary that was so beautifully written by Gil Troy is on the front page of today's Jerusalem Post, as it should be, and as Mel would have told us it should be, right? I'm fairly certain he would have said, well, yeah, you know, he would have said that. Melvin. And now we're actually moving on. Those were the logistical parts, and now we're moving on to the real heart of the Pula. Our first speakers today are Heidi and Ian Stern. And I know I am never going to do justice to this relationship. To say that Heidi and Ian were extended members of the Reisfield family, it's just not accurate enough. Heidi and Ian are missing everything but the actual DNA that makes them Reisfields. But on top of that, of course, they intersected with Mel on 100 different levels, starting in high school, Ian, right? And all the way through, and so many collaborations and so much work together and teaching together and building together. And I'm going to let them speak for themselves. Heidi, Ian, up to you.
All right, thank you. Hello to everybody, and I really wish that we would be able to greet you all with a great embrace. I want to thank those of you, Andy and Daphna and Gil and David, for organizing this for everybody. We're very honored that you considered us, and I am humbled. Katonti milifnechem. I'm just going to say a very, very few things, and then Ian will speak. I've heard, you know, on the Zoom Shiva with Sharon and Ma and Gil and Shai, that everybody has their Mel story. And if we put it all together, it's like a great mosaic. It's just truly beautiful. But what's always struck me about Sweet Melvin is that, and I think, and Doron Krakow began his, I would call it his bed for Mel with Aniveta. And that's, I'm sorry. That is how we feel right now. We want to say to all of you to carry that forward and to feel that indeed you can change the world. You can affect the world in the most beautiful ways, small ways and bigger ways, and that will be carrying on Mel's legacy to us all. His innocence and his love of all of you and of people. That's what made it all possible. And we love you and we thank you. And we know that it's so hard for everyone to believe that vigorous man, that lover of life, is not with us physically, but he is with us through all of you. So thank you.
No, I'd like to share some of the things that I said at the funeral on Wednesday. Mel wouldn't be happy that I'm reading it, but I don't think I can do it any other way. Everyone here has personal stories about their experiences with Mel. He was larger than life, and his impact on thousands of us is immeasurable. He often used the phrase, "We Jews are endowed with a sense of history." This was not a slogan from Mel, it was a call for action. It was both Jewish and universal, which for Mel were one and the same. Soviet Jewry, Ethiopian Jewry, Israel, civil rights, March of Dimes, supporting the boycotts of lettuce and grapes to support migrant workers. This is all part of that man. Mel always told me that his teachings were a mile wide, but an inch deep. But of course, he was selling himself short. His words and his actions resonated in the hearts of thousands, and following his lead led so many to invest themselves in social action and education. For the past 55 years, he has been for me a source of inspiration and gave my life purpose and direction. He had a love of life that of course included his children and grandchildren, who he clearly adored. And of course, there was his beloved Yafa, another moral compass. These past few years, due to limited mobility, he rarely left his home. This did not dim his love for life. He remained positive till the end. From his chair, he appreciated the phone calls and the visits from family and friends. He enjoyed reading, music, opera, and food, especially treif. He would often say that if there is a heaven, he hoped that his moral behavior would outweigh his dietary habits. Heidi and I and our children had the privilege of being an extended part of the Reisfield family, celebrating family events, Shabbatot, holidays together. Finally, reading all those beautiful blogs that people have been sending and are still sending, it's abundantly clear that Mel touched something in all of us. And I believe that it's there that his legacy continues. May he rest in peace with his beloved Yafa.
For the stranger and the citizen, help the helpless in society, the poor, the widowed, the orphan, compassion for animals, sa'ar ba'alei chayim, alachad kama v'chama, even more so for human beings. All of this moral code, do not go up and down as a talebearer, or do not hold back the wages of the worker till the dawn. All of that is gone. They don't know. And so on market days, I'll be going to the shuk, and I'll be bringing the people up to Har HaBayit. And we'll be learning Parshat HaShavua, your bar mitzvah, your bat mitzvah, the Parshot HaShavua, the portions of the week. We've been doing that for 2,440 years, from the time of Ezra. Now that is the miracle of Judaism, not the sun standing still, not the waters parting, but that moral and ethical code that we've given to the world. And you've heard it already today from Noah, you've heard it from so many different people. Avi, who went with me in 1963 in that march on Washington. Yes, we're inner-directed, Soviet Jewry, Ethiopian Jewry, but we're outer-directed also. We care about others. And when those people came to me and said, Mel, look at what you guys are doing. You're activists, social action. Can you help us? This is the March of Dimes. There are kids with polio. We collect little dimes in these little booklets. Some of the older people will remember that. And how are we going to get more people to give us money? This is before the vaccine for polio. And how about a walkathon? One of the first walkathons in the history of walkathons. Not Neil Armstrong, not for cancer, not for anything else, but again, for the March of Dimes, started by the young Judeans from this camp.
We could all listen. I think we could keep listening to Mel. we're going to go back to New Jersey now. We're going to talk about Gane Yehuda. We're going to go back to Mel's home, where he brought young Judaea to Englewood, to Fort Lee, to Livingston, where, you know, in its day, there were only about 100 kids a week coming to a young Judaea club in Livingston, you know. And even though we're not at the Metropolitan Hotel in Asbury Park, we can relive some of those memories. So I'm happy to introduce Chanicha and Madracha in Mel's Ulpan. And by the way, she was also a former national maskira of Young Judaea, Debbie Kenny, and Daron Krakow, who I'm sure feels that the most important thing on his resume was as regional director of New Jersey Young Judaea. Debbie, up to you.
First walkathons in the history of walkathons. The last time I spoke with Mel was a couple of months ago. I called him periodically. And I was in the middle that day on a weekend of writing a chapter in my second book about where I learned everything that I learned about education. And I said to him, I'm curious, how did you learn to be an educator? You know, I had never thought to ask him that, and I was wondering. So he pauses for a minute and he says, you're asking me this now when I'm fucking 92 years old? I just had to laugh so I don't cry, which is what I've been doing for the last 5 days. And I think we all have that in common, and one can wonder, you know, why are we so sad beyond how much we loved him and how much he meant to us? And I've been thinking it's because he imbued our lives with hope, meaning Mel taught us everything that we needed to be empowered to do something about the injustices in the world. And so losing him beyond a personal loss could feel like the loss of the hope that we felt when we were in our own formative years as teenagers trying to figure out the meaning of our own lives. He taught us so much more than that, of course. He taught us independent thinking and rule breaking and civil rights, and he taught us activism, and he taught us to love singing, and he taught us the power of singing. He taught us the power of community. He taught us the importance of everyone belonging. And I think it's fitting that we are speaking about Mel on MLK Day weekend. Of course, MLK famously said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And Mel taught us how to take that idea and turn it into the way we live our lives. I want to extend my personal condolences to Gil and Sharon and Shai and the whole family. And also on behalf of I think we're up to over 500 people here. I know that if every single person could speak with you, they would share their condolences with you, his family. And I actually asked my own 3 children to join today because I wanted them to understand who this person was, because they are who they are because I am who I am because of Mel. My birthday 2 months ago, I got this little card from my daughter, and she says, my daughter Rachel, she says, I'm so grateful to have you as a mother. Because of you, I've dedicated my life to helping those less fortunate with issues of environmental justice. How lucky I am to have a mother who promotes social justice and independent thinking, etc. How lucky we all are, because that's actually Mel. And the impact he had on the world is impossible to capture in words. So I will cut it at the peak as he taught us. And I can't wait to have a chance to sing with everybody. later in the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I was a vet boy, and so my exposure to Mel during my TY days was from afar. He was larger than life. I was unworthy to even be on the basketball court when we occasionally came together as the camps. So I knew of Mel, but I didn't know Mel. In 1986, I accepted a job as a madrich, as the leader of the East Brunswick, New Jersey Club of Young Judea. And I ran into Mel again at Fall Convention that year, was struck at having been taken back as if I was back on the lawns at Tel Yehuda. Only this time I got a little closer and I had a chance to see Mel up close as the leader and the driving force of the Ruach of Young Judea. There weren't that many basketball players, so I managed to make my way onto the court, and I think my first bruised ribs were lovingly handed out by Mel over the course of the various conventions we attended that year. And with Mel's active encouragement, I became regional director of Ganei Yehuda in the fall of 1987. And so nominally, that made me Mel's boss. I'm part of a grouping of people who nominally held that role, all of us knowing quite well that nobody was Mel's boss. But we got to be in a responsible position while Mel was nearby. I would say whispering in our ears, but the truth is he was screaming in our ears. Even then, driving us to activism, driving us to idealism, driving us to levels of ruach and engagement with the kids that set a tone and left an extraordinary mark. It's a little strange that I'm representing the staff of Ganei Yehuda of New Jersey and Judea, because it was my first year as regional director that was Mel and Yafa's last in New Jersey. When at the end of the 87-88 academic year, they fulfilled their dream and returned to Israel. And Mel left a big empty space behind for me. But Mel set the bar. He set the tone. He was our dugma. He was my dugma. And he left an example that we followed in earnest, in a determined desire to live up to his hopes and expectations for us. It stayed with us after he went to Israel. And I think it stayed with each of us and remains with each of us over the rest of our lives. So I am very honored to represent this region today on this extraordinary occasion, and am deeply moved and proud to be together with this extended Young Judea family as we share in the Reisfield family's loss of our extraordinary dugma.
Thank you, Jerome. We're going to go back a few generations. And I'm really delighted to bring in Norman Cohen, longtime friend of Mel, T.Y. Marquez, and the first director of Machane Bet. Norman.
Thank you very much. When you meet someone for the first time and strike up a friendship, you never know how long it's going to last. The first time I ever saw Mel was in late August 1959. I was only 15 years old. I went to Tel Yehuda to play basketball in the National Young Judea basketball tournament way back when. And on the first day, we were playing a pickup game with some of the staff. And going up for a rebound, someone hit me in the stomach and knocked me out of bounds. I looked up as this crazy person extended his hand, pulled me up and embraced me as if I had known him my entire life. And thus began a lifelong relationship with my friend and mentor and model and brother and confidant, Melvin. That initial moment told me everything I would find out and love about Mel over 61 years. On the surface, Mel could be tough, demanding, even aggressive. I guess in part it was the Bronx in him, which was evident in everything that he did. And yet, as we quickly got to know him, we found a human being with the biggest heart and soul who cared for truly his students, his associates, his friends, all those in need, but especially his family, whom he loved inordinately. His life partner, Yafa, who we miss inordinately, Sharon and Nama, Shai, Rosie, and Gil. Mel understood that living life fully, but also teaching, involved not only the need to share ourselves, our lives, and our passion for Judaism, the Jewish people, the state of Israel, but to embody caring and concern for people around the world in desperate need of help and support. And his ability as a teacher and human being who opened himself to others, modeling who he was and what he believed, became a model for me and for the myriad of others who he touched. I can honestly say that my style of teaching, nay, my entire teaching career, my work at the Hebrew Union College, these past 50 years, was shaped by his influence. 61 years of friendship, including 12 summers at Tel Yehuda, 7 years teaching in Fort Lee, 10 years of playing basketball every single Friday morning, life changes, 32 years of a long distance friendship, Jerusalem, New York, which involved phone conversations more than once a week. And it all ended abruptly on Tuesday. And I'm sure the thought has occurred to all of us that our lives will simply not be the same without him. But we pray that Chana Senesh was right when she wrote, "There are stars above so far away, we only see their light long after the star itself is gone." And so it is with the people we love. Their memories keep shining ever brightly through, though their time with us is done. With the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. As we live our days, these are the ways that we will remember Mel Reisfield.
Mel delivered the core YJ values of Zionism, Tikkun Olam, and pluralism with chazak, ruach, and when necessary, chutzpah.
You can't skip tefillah to Tel Yehuda and not get caught. I tried that while walking back. Mel was sitting on his porch at TY and asked me what I was doing, and I said, "I forgot my kippah." And he went, "Bullshit, Lieberman, you were skipping tefillah and God is punishing you."
Very importantly, you came to my house and convinced my parents that I could go to TY and not become a communist. That made all the difference.
Many things I learned from Mel. Probably the most important was how to shoot the two-handed set shot. Love the man.
Erev Tov, good evening, everybody. My name is David Stone. It's particularly moving for me to be sitting here with Mel.
Yeah, it was great. It was basketball, it was fun, it was adventure. But we decided we were going to give these kids a feeling of Jewish history, but do it in a way that would be exciting.
My fondest memory of Mel is of him teaching us Hebrew songs, how his eyes would sparkle and you could see the love for the Hebrew language.
The passion every single day, in every lesson that he gave, that was Mel. And he's never lost that, not ever.
I learned from Mel the love for the movement and for what we were doing and the seriousness of it.
A living Zionism, a living Judaism. And part of that living Judaism is that moral and ethical code.
From Mel Reisfield, I learned how to cheat at basketball and get away with it.
I think I got a hook shot over him and got it, and boy, did he nail me. I still have the bruise here, I think.
Mel Reisfield was a terrible cheater. That's why everybody jokes about it, because it was so obvious. Anything I learned from Mel, I learned how to do really well. I learned how to give a sikha. I learned how to be a passionate Zionist. I learned how to love Israel, the Jewish people, human beings. And I learned to try to be as good a person as I could be.
And I want to use my 30 seconds before the camera to honor Yafa Reisfield. Without Yafa at his side, Melvin, as she was wont to call him when he was in need of direction, would not have become the man that we are honoring this evening.
I'm a better person today because of Mel, and I'm forever grateful for our friendship and for all that he's taught me.
He's an outstanding, charismatic Jewish educator, and I learned a lot from that partnership.
What I learned from Mel was to always start an activity with a bang and always end at the height of the excitement.
One thing I clearly remember in high school was dressing up in prison garb in front of Lincoln Center. The Bolshoi Ballet was playing, and we said, "Let my people go."
I learned about Jesus. Thank you, Mel.
People like Mel have immense respect for the creativity and intellect of kids.
I learned the fact that you can be like this incredible educator and still curse, so we can have this like little fuck bonding. I'm not allowed to say the word fuck anymore, but now they have to put it in because I'm talking about Mel. You can't talk about Mel without saying fuck.
Okay. Fuck. Why can't you come to the lunch?
Because my co-counselor's coming and somebody's got to watch the kids.
Fuck you can come.
Mel set the compass for our beliefs in Zionism for a whole generation of the kids that I used to go to Hebrew school with.
Every opportunity in life is a time to educate.
Those were the days, my friend.
They certainly were.
I think they'll never end. Da, 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 da.
You got it?
Wow. Humongous forearms. Where do these forearms come from?
Mel surely taught all of us Judaism not something for shrinking violets, but rather for Gvarim like we tried to be.
I am thrilled that you're all here. I'm really overwhelmed because it's not just what you're doing for me, the award. It's all of the work that we did in Young Judea and Tel Yehuda over a half a century. We cared about our own, we cared about others. It's just wonderful that you're all here, and I love you all.
That was great. So many slides and memories and moments, and I'm just going to move it over to Shira because I think we need to sing a little. And I think that we all know that as kids, we loved Shira because it was fun and it was noisy and we got to clap. But Mel had an educational purpose. The Shira built Chevra. The Shira taught us Hebrew. The Shira taught us about Israel and geography, and it taught us values. And to talk about that and to get us to do a little bit of that, I'm really happy to introduce two of Mel's many, many favorite partners at the microphone in the Chadar Ochel, Eli Rakowitz and Bill Slot. Eli.
Yeah, hi. I'm going to talk about Mel the activist, as you knew him to be, not only for the Jewish causes Ian was talking, but many others. I'll go back to the 1970s when I was a Mirakez with Mel at TY, and I was teaching for him at Temple B'nai Abraham. I became aware of a crisis in the Jewish world that wasn't known and wasn't talked about. Ethiopian Jewry was reaching its end. After thousands of years of courage remaining with their faith in Ethiopia, they were about to die out. And most American Jews didn't know that there was such a community. And certainly our Jewish leaders in America and sadly, even in Israel, did not get involved to help them. I found this out and I went, where am I going to go? I went straight to my teacher, to my guide, Mel. I made him aware of this, and I remember the intense look on his face. He said, Eli, we can't let this happen. I'm going to get involved. Well, sometime later, it looked like really the end was approaching for that community, and the group of activists that I was part of, we made a decision that was a desperate decision, a gamble, to call a public demonstration for an issue that wasn't well known at all. And why was it desperate? Because if we called a demonstration and we called together the press, the Jewish press from throughout the country, and the Jewish leaders who hadn't been involved in trying to help were watching, if we called everyone together and we failed, nobody came, then the journalists would say, what a joke, and we'd never see them again cover the issue. But more importantly, the Jewish leaders who were not involved and not looking to get involved, and also, sadly, again, the state of Israel, they would look at the demonstration that nobody came to, and they would say, Ethiopian Jewry doesn't matter. People don't care about them. We don't have to act to save them. Ethiopian Jews don't matter. So again, I went to Mel. I told him what our plan was and what was at stake here. The Sunday came when the demonstration was to take place opposite the United Nations. And the reporters were there, representatives were there from the Israeli consulate, and we had nothing. A few of us had corralled a few of our friends. The plaza was empty. And I remember looking down at the pavement and saying, is this going to be where it all ends? Thousands of years of Ethiopian Jewry, is this going to be where it ends, right here? And then somebody said, what are those buses that are coming towards us? Who are they? And I saw on the side of the bus some company from New Jersey. And I said, hey guys, this is Mel Reisfield. He's coming to save the day. He's coming to save this issue. And the buses pulled up and the doors opened, and hundreds, and I don't exaggerate, hundreds of kids started pouring out of the buses with placards, with banners, Save Ethiopian Jewry, and they were singing Am Yisrael Chai, and the plaza filled up until it was completely full, and the journalists were taking pictures and writing. And that week, Jewish newspapers all throughout the country, I remember them in Denver, in Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, the headline said, American Jews demand that the Jews of Ethiopia be rescued. The American Jews demand. But that message was gotten by the people who needed to get it. And the rescue started. There were fewer than 300 Ethiopian Jews who had made it to Israel at the time of that rally. Mel, I'm so grateful that you lived to see the day that 140,000 Ethiopian Jews were living in Israel. The whole community rescued. And I'll just add a thought now, if you'll allow me. I am confident that of those 140,000 Ethiopian Jews who came home to Israel, it wouldn't surprise me if not one of them knew your name. No. And that would have been just fine with you. And I looked at the photographs in these Jewish newspapers from around the country. And Mel, I didn't see your face in the middle of any of those photographs. I'm sure you were off to the side. And that would have been fine with you too, Mel. I know that. Because you were not looking for headlines, and you were not looking for praise for yourself and recognition for yourself. That wasn't you. So, Mel, we, the hundreds of us here today, representing all the thousands of people whose lives you changed, we've come together now ourselves to give you that praise and to give you that gratitude. And Mel, we want to just simply say that you were our guide, you were our teacher, and you showed us the way. And you will always be remembered, and we will always love you.
נשנה העולם. אני ואתה אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה העולם. אני ואתה ננסה מההתחלה. היה לנו רע, אין דבר זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה One of the things that Mel loved most of all was Shira Shketa. It was his moment every week. As the sun was setting, but Shabbat was still with us, gathering in the dining room, sometimes outside, and singing without musical accompaniment. So I'll put down the guitar. And one of the songs he loved the most was Shir HaEmek, because it harkened back both to the time and the place where he began his career as a chalutz, as a pioneer, and where he met and married Yafo, Kibbutz Genigar, preparing in Hachshara to found Kibbutz HaSololin. I'll give you one verse. Sing along at home. לילה חיוור משתרע על שדות עמק יזרעאל, טל מלמטה ולבנה מעל, מבית אלפה עד נהלל. דממה לילה מליל, דממה בישראל. נו מה עמק ארץ תפארת, ענו לך משמרת. נו מה עמק ארץ תפארת, ענו לך משמרת.
Thank you, Bill. You know, we've been on Zoom long enough now. Thanks, Debbie, showing us the Shiron. To know that singing together on Zoom is difficult, but I'm telling you that you better sing and you better look at the words. So even if we're not singing together, we've got one more song later and you all better sing and look at the words. Was that okay? I think that was as close as I could I don't do a Mel. There are people who do a much better Mel, but at the essence, the message. Seeing Bill, Bill also represents a community, a bunch of people that were very, very, very special to Mel. I'm talking, of course, about Kibbutz Keturah, and how whenever he talked about Keturah, he would speak with such love, and he would glow. And when he would go to Keturah for a Shabbat, he would come into, anybody who worked with Mel on your course, he'd come back after a weekend, after Shabbat at Keturah, and you'd say, Mel, how was Keturah? How was the weekend? And he would say, magnificent, magnificent. Those kids are so magnificent. I cry the whole time I'm there. And I'm pretty sure that's so. We're going to now move up, I don't know, a few thousand decades. And I'm going to bring in Noah Gallagher, who's representing a younger generation, really a fortunate person, because he represents a few generations in there of your courses and of TY folks who had the chance to really work with Mel closely. But what Noah said some beautiful things about Mel this week. So I know he'll share them, but I think that there was something very special to be a member of Mel's Ulpan on your course. When you think about the number of hours spent per week with Mel in that Sifriya, that's something very unique. So I'm going to turn it over to Noah and say hi to Lauren while we're at it.
Thank you. I was in Mel's class in 1995. I was totally starstruck. We sang Hebrew songs, never enthusiastically enough, ever, of course. He ran conjugation drills with us very aggressively, often ending with a lesson in appropriate conjugation of expletive insults. Tis Dayan, tis Dayani, loud screaming from the Sifriya. After Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, that November, Mel was really heartbroken. But what does Mel do? He turns it into a lesson. He uses Shir L'Shalom as a vehicle. The origin, the meaning, the context was a lesson in Hebrew, in history, in politics. How overnight this joyful protest anthem became a dirge. And there were a lot of memorable lessons, obviously, but I think the most important lesson I learned from Mel was about love. He spoke about Yafa all the time. He told us how they met, how they married, how much he loved her, his devotion to her, but it was the way he would say her name that resonated with me. Like he was saying one of the ineffable names of God. He'd grab his chest, Yafa, my Yafa, Yafa Shali. Like she lived in his heart and kept it beating. This man had a crush on his wife after decades. The first time I met Yafa at their home, I was almost shocked or disappointed that she didn't float into the room glowing with the angels heralding around her. But that's the way Mel reacted to her, and that's the way he looked at her. I aspired to that relationship. I did a few years later, I was the assistant director at TY when Mel came back after a pretty long absence from TY, and we got into a big argument, big enough they stopped talking to me for a little bit. And at some point I had to end it. I worked up the courage and I said to Mel, like, let's stop this shit, can we get a beer? So we go to Romans, and for 3 hours, we sit there and he tells me about, the dozens of Pishers who I think are probably all on the call right now. And he wasn't insulting them. It was just all this affection for all the things that all these kids are doing for the Jewish people. 5 years later, I'm back in Jerusalem, and I call Mel. After beat, he says, Noah, the Jew with the Irish name, we had a hard time, but then you did right. So he says, come to the house tomorrow. And I did, and I spent time with Mel and Yafa in their home. And I watched him again look at her as she came into the room, floating, glowing. And 3 weeks later, I proposed to my wife. Thank you, Mel. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you. I think I'm frozen. Thanks, Noah. Noah was a child of the Midwest, and we have another child of the Midwest, another member of Keturah who has, there's so much more, so many ways she intertwined with Mel. But we're asking Leah Kamen Rosenzweig today to represent the dozens and dozens of shlichim, members of the Mishlachat, who came to TY, who came to the regions, and to talk about that very special relationship and the impact that Mel had on Israelis before he was back in Israel and always. Leah?
Thanks, Andy. I am super honored to be asked to represent the generations of shlichim that were sent from Israel to young Judea, who worked with Mel. Of course, I will say that for many of the shlichim I knew, encountering this very unique man for the first time came as somewhat of a shock. After all, we were the ones who were supposed to be the experts in bringing Israel to American Jewish youth. Instead, we Israelis found ourselves learning so much from this American Jew who was so baffled that he confused us. He dressed and acted in many ways like a sabra. He cursed like a sailor. He cheated, roughhouse, but his depth of knowledge and commitment to Israel and to Judaism and to Zionism, and his ability to truly transmit that commitment to our chanichim surpassed us all. Of course, by the time I was sent from my home at Kibbutz Keturah to be the Shlicha for Hamachshimim in the early 90s, Mel and I already knew each other well. And throughout the over 40 years that we knew each other, our relationship matured. It's no secret that in the 70s, both as a chanicha and then as a madricha and merakezet at Tel Yehuda, Mel and I had our disagreements. I was a young feminist committed to empowering our chanichot to be vocal and active in all realms of life, including, of course, a central part of camp life, sports. Needless to say, Mel and I did not see eye to eye on gender inclusiveness on the sports field. Years later, decades later, I guess I should say, when Mel and Yafa visited their many friends at Keturah, and when we would meet in their beautiful home in Jerusalem, we often laughed about those conflicts in those early years. I'd like to think that we both had mellowed over the years, or maybe we just recognize that being part of a pluralistic youth movement means accepting and respecting people you don't agree with. At any rate, since returning from Shlichut, I've continued to work in Jewish Zionist informal education and can say that that direction was in no small part influenced by Mel, by the unorthodox methods of teaching he developed and recognized as so powerful. Mel loved his chanichim. He believed in us and in our ability to change the world. In the name of the member of Kibbutz Keturah who loved and respected Mel, and in the name of the countless shlichim who loved, respected, and also feared Mel, I state we're very sad now to have lost this great man, but we haven't in the deepest sense lost him. We are committed to continuing Mel's legacy in our lives, in our communities, in our work. We will perpetuate the values he believed in and pass on to us, and God willing, I know that's pissing you off, Mel, that I'm saying that, but it's me. We will continue to pass those on to generations to come.
Thank you, Leah. Okay, we know that Aleph was better, but apparently there are some people who think that Bet was best. And representing that viewpoint, okay, fine. To Bet Merigzim, who nevertheless fell under the spell of Mel and his Aleph charms, I'm happy to bring Steve Greenberg, followed by Gil Troy. Steve.
Hi. Yeah, I was a Madriach and Marrakez and Bet for many years, and I will say that in some ways being on Sevet in Bet was the best of all possible worlds. We got the benefit of Mel's mentorship. He would prep us on our sichot the night before. We gave the sichot the first time we were Merigzim in Alumim, giving us all the highlights of the sicha and how to do all the dramatic moments, the shock from within, a shock from without, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all those Mel's greatest hits. He taught us all of them. And there's still to this day are generations of people who, when they speak in public, they're really doing Mel Reisfield. And that's a thing. There's a Mel Reisfield style of speaking that I think we all know it when we see it. And there are hundreds of people who practice it, including myself. Over the years, I've been very privileged because I got to get up a few times and say a few words about Mel during some of those many events where he was so deservedly honored over the years. And he was honored a lot of times. And on those occasions, I always began my speech the same way. I would say, I slept with Mel Reisfield. Now, this was true in the sense that back in 1979, for reasons that remain unknown to me until this day, I was assigned to be Mel's roommate at the Metropolitan Hotel in Asbury Park, where I was a guest madriach at the New Jersey Young Judea Convention. Mind you, up until that point, I didn't know Mel at all, except at a distance. We had never so much as had a conversation. Okay, so it was this mind-blowing experience for me to suddenly be Mel's roommate. But that's not why I always open up when I honor Mel. That's not why I always open up by saying, I slept with Mel Reisfield. The reason that I always open up my tributes that way is because I always wanted to honor Mel's well-known and mentioned today several times cardinal rule of giving a sicha, bombastic opening. I slept with Mel Reisfield. Mel always started his sichot with a bombastic opening, but the truth is he was bombastic from beginning to end. During my weekend as his roommate, Mel would continually give me running previews of whatever great feat of leadership he was about to perform at the convention. Like before Saturday night dinner, he said to me, tonight, after dinner, when we do Shir Ashketa, you're going to get to experience with your own eyes and ears what the world's been raving about for 25 years, Reisfield in action. Now, my 18-year-old self was bemused by this, but sure enough, that evening, Mel led a Shir Ashketa session that was no less than spellbinding. He knew he was great, but as Muhammad Ali famously said, it's not bragging if you can back it up. In our shared hotel room, I also got to see a very different side of Mel. Both nights while we were lying in our beds, he'd start to cry. He'd say, I miss my wife. I miss Yafa. Yafa, why aren't you here? I want my Yafa. Mel Reisfield may have roared like a lion, but at heart, he was a pussycat. Romantic, sentimental, and a real crybaby. People talk about how every time he was honored, he'd say, another fucking plaque. But every time I ever saw him be honored, he also broke down and cried. Mel was a man of great passions, as we all know, about Israel, about youth, about Yafa and his family, about food, about sports. He loved the Yankees. The last time I ever saw Mel Reisfield, I visited his apartment along with Gil Troy in the fall of 2019. And we had this long talk about that year's Yankees team. Now, mind you, Mel had no access to watch Yankee games on his TV system, and he didn't know how to use a computer. So his entire knowledge of the Yankees at that moment came from reading the newspaper. But he knew everything about the Yankees because he remained passionate about the Yankees and so many things into his 90s. Mel Reisfield lived, as we all know, a very big life. And just as importantly, he lived it well. I will always feel blessed to have been a protege and then a friend for so many years. I'll miss you, Mel. We all will.
Thank you, Steve. At the funeral the other day, it was intimate, it was beautiful, it was small. And we all said, Mel needed the brass bands. Mel would have wanted a big deal, and Heidi in her wisdom said, don't worry, we'll do something for the Ortsite. But I'm watching this, I'm thinking Mel would have loved this. This is big, this is beautiful. This, you can feel his heart, you can feel his presence. And so, and he would have, of course, cried repeatedly because he was indeed a crybaby in the best sense of the words. I want to thank Sharon and Gil and Aman, the Reisfield family, for opening up yourselves to have this sharing, have this moment. I want to thank the incomparable Andy Mizels and all the other toasters, and you all kept it short, as Mel would have been very proud to see. All of you emerged as Mel Whispers this evening. I want to thank the impromptu organizing committee. Let's give a special shout out to David Weinstein, who's done so much to keep the Tel Yehuda spirit and the Young Judea spirit alive, to Daphne Laskin, the director of engagement, who made this all go so smoothly, and the newest member of our family, Adina Friedman. Your title is CEO, Young Judea Global, but we're just going to call you National Director, and because we're very, very nostalgic and very, very tied to our traditions. But most of all, I want to thank each and every one of you. There's still over 400 of us on this call. And I don't know about you, but I've been like multitasking. I'm exhausted. I've been listening to every word because every word is so powerful, so precious. I've been reading every one of the chats, and then I keep on going to see the screens because I'm seeing so many people who are so important to me, who I cherish so much, who I miss so intensely. And that was the power of Mel. It wasn't just that he had, Debbie Kenny said something amazing the other night. She said, everyone felt that Mel was their favorite. And it wasn't that he played favorites, right? But when we were with Mel, you felt that intensity. And we all have that connection, and he also was this great connector. I have the privilege of leading us in the Mourner's Kaddish in memory of Mel Reisfield, Moshe Stei Orez, our Zionist Rebbe. But before we do that, I just have to say one last thing. I want to toast all his crazy Jewish contradictions. This was the guy who tried shoving shrimp down the kosher kids' throats. This was the guy who would beseech the Lord he didn't quite believe in every time he would force us to toast to Mel's health. But this was the guy who, as we saw, would quote the prophets endlessly to challenge us to think of the strangers and the widows and the oppressed. And of course, this is the guy who rose in Rebers when they played in that German-themed inn, Hatikva. And he said, what, are they mocking us? And was ready to fight. But of course, it turned out that the man playing was a German Jew who had been rescued by the owners of Rebers, and they hugged and they kissed, and of course, they cried. Yehi Zichro Baruch. So let's all rise. Those of you who can unmute, please unmute. And it's really my privilege to say, Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma, Divrach Rutei, Ve'amnich Malchutei, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, Ha'ed, Chol Israel, Ba'ala, Bisman Karim, V'imru Amen. Shei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, Am Yomei Maya, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei Kudusha, V'yichu, Le'elah, Kol Birchata V'shirata, Tushbachata V'nechamata, Damiran be'alma v'yimnu.
Amen.
Yehi shlom
Yehi
rabba
Shlom
min
Arba min
Shemaya.
Shemaya.
V'chaim
Chayim
aleinu.
Tovim aleinu
V'kol
v'al kol
Yisrael
Yisrael
v'imru
v'imru amen.
Oseh shalom v'mamav.
V'mamav.
Yaseh
Yaseh
shalom.
shalom. Aleinu v'al kol
V'al kol
Yisrael.
Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen. We are not quite at the end. We're pretty close. We're going to do something now. We're going to take a couple of minutes. We're going to hear Mel a little. We're going to see Mel a little. We're going to give people a minute to just catch their breath. I think Gil put it perfectly. It's overwhelming. People haven't had a chance to look in the chat. Maybe I'm sure people want to connect privately with people who maybe they haven't seen and exchange information. And we're going to do that for just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to come back for the last bit of our program.
I go now?
Yeah,
Is it working? Can you hear me?
I hope so. Go ahead.
You are always in my heart, even though we're far apart. I can hear the music of the song of love I sang to you. You are always in my heart, and when skies above are gray, I remember that you care, and then and there, the sun broke through. Just before I go to sleep, there's a rendezvous I keep, and the dream I always dream helps me forget we're far apart. I don't know exactly when, dear, but I'm sure we'll meet again, dear. You are always in my heart. You are always in my heart.
Thanks. I love that picture at the microphone. Thank you. Okay, so we're approaching the end of our formal program. It's getting late in Israel. The family is exhausted. They already had Shiva today in Israel. And we want to give them an opportunity to have an elegant escape. We want to thank them one more time for being with us today. You know, I still feel tremendous responsibility in being asked to sort of guide us through. And David, Madracha is my favorite job. So thank you for describing it as that. That's where I feel happiest. But I eagerly accepted because I thought, well, this will be the last thing I do for Mel, or we do for Mel. So of course, and then I realized, as so many people have said way more eloquently than I can do right now, that's wrong, because we do something for Mel every single day when we follow his values, when we take the lessons he taught us and we apply them to our lives and our teaching. And all of us are teachers, no matter what career we're in, because that's what happens when you spend time with Mel. We carry on his values and his passions, and we do our job to prepare the people that will follow us, because that's what he did. And as I listened to everything today and thinking about all these memories, and I'm amazed again, as if I didn't even know this man. And I'm thinking, how did he do this? How did one man do all this? How was he this great educator? And how did he make every single person feel so special? And how did he find a way to connect to the kid who was like, a rule breaker and, tough kid? And, those of us, the goody goodies who, would never, ever break a rule. How did he do that? Every kid from every background, every kid from every ability, whether they went to day school in yeshiva or whether they'd never done anything in the Jewish world before they came to camp. How did he do that? So yeah, he prepared. He prepared. I remember once when I was 14 and I was a teacher's aide at Temple B'nai Abraham, on his desk, I saw a legal pad. He always wrote on a legal pad, and he had a to-do list that was like 5 pages long. And he said to me, everybody thinks I don't prepare. Everybody thinks and he made it look so easy and spontaneous. And yeah, he was incredibly talented, but he prepared. He said, don't tell anybody. Of course, he was kidding. But I learned that lesson to prepare. So how did he do it? Yes, it was passion, it was charisma, it was talent, it was intuition. But I really feel today that it comes really down to one word, and that's love. It's love. It's love for all the things that so many people have talked about today, that I love for what he did, and love for Israel and the Jewish people and his wife and his family and his friends and his causes and his values. But with all of that, this guy still had room in his heart for all of us, thousands of us, every kid in every chug in, I don't know, 40 years at Tel Yehuda, every kid in every class on your course, every kid in every Hebrew school, every kid in every club. He loved us. He was love personified, tough guy, mushy inside. And that's how he did it. That's how he did it. That's how he connected. And that's how he made every single person who met him feel like, yeah, I'm his favorite. I know the last thing that we would all want to say to Mel back is, we love you, Mel. Anachnu ohavim otcha. We love you. And the other thing we want to say is thank you. Thank you, Mel Reisfield. Toda. Bill.
תודה על כל מה שבראת, תודה על מה שלי נתת, על אור עיניים, חבר או שניים, על מה שיש לי בעולם, על שיר קולח ולב סלח, שבזכותם אני קיים. תודה על כל מה שבראת, תודה על מה שלי נתת, על צחוק של ילד ושמי התכלת, על אדמה ובית חם, פינה לשבת, אישה אוהבת, שבזכותם אני קיים. פינה לשבת, אישה אוהבת, שבזכותם אני קיים. תודה מאוד.
Toda, Bill. Toda, Andy. Toda to everybody. On Tuesday, when I heard the news, I was at TY with my daughter. Walked over to the Beit Am, went inside. And it was quiet, as it's been quiet now for a year and a half. And I thought about it being full. And Mel's voice in that building. And now we're going to try to do something that I wish we were doing in the Beit Am, which is giving some people a chance to speak who, without now throwing out the script. And I'm sure of the 419 people here, you all have a Mel story. We won't get to hear them all, maybe just a couple of hopefully quick moments from a few people. And so what I'm going to do, and excuse me beforehand if we don't get to everybody, but going to ask people to use that little hand raising function in Zoom to raise your hand. And of course, you're scattered across 20 screens right now on my computer. So we're going to try to look around and find some people if you want to say a few words. And feel free to leave when you're ready to leave. And we'll probably do this for just a little bit of time. And as Andy said at the very beginning, this is not the last of the opportunities for us to come together and to celebrate Mel's life and to teach Mel's words and also to be together as one young Judaea community. So I'm going to start by turning it over to the person who I think maybe does the best Mel Reisfield imitation, Elon Wagner, or Stu Wagner, as many of you know him.
Those doors, close those doors. That's the best I can do over Zoom. But I wanted to say that this has been an amazing evening and so many memories and so many stories of Mel. I feel so full right now of all these years and everything we've all been through. I was just thinking for a second, something special about Mel in my view is that not only there was so much of him that was inspiring and that led me to action and made me want to do things, but there was also the part of Mel which allowed us to object to what he was saying and created in us also the desire to rebel and to articulate our own views. I think part of his leadership was that he was so passionate and so clear in his vision that it gave you a space to create your own. I know Leah spoke before about the battle over inclusion of women on the sports field. I remember that. And I remember also the eternal discussion about the Sikha and the Pula, which was actually a discussion about the nature of education in some ways. And watching Mel kind of deal with the changing of generations and the changing nature of education and this discussion of how to engage kids today, I remember that as an argument and as a sense of going up against an icon. And there were others, of course, who shared different views on that. And I think that was really special about Mel, was the way that he brought us all to become who we are, not just through agreement, but also through that creative tension, which he believed in so much. Thanks for the opportunity, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Elon. I'm going to call on Steve Friedman now. Steve's muted.
Okay.
Yeah, good now.
Okay, thank you. I started saying, I really have to say that I'm not mourning. Mel is still so alive in my memories, in my everyday, that he's going to stay around for a long, long time. We can't talk to him in person, but we can speak to him in our memories. We can speak to him in our actions and in our dreams for the Jewish people. I was Mel's oldest young Judean. He was my Hebrew teacher on Kibbutz HaSolalim on the first year course. And after that, I was his first boys madrich when he was Merakez for the first time at Tel Yehuda. So I can't look at Mel as somebody who was my teacher. We learned together. And I think that my entire life was changed because of him. Now I'm an Israeli tour guide looking for clients if anybody's interested, but not expecting any in the near future. And the things that I teach, the things that I say, the way that I approach people, all comes from the lessons that I learned from Mel. So Yehi Zichro Baruch, My great love, my dear love to Sharon, to the boys, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Gonna throw it over. Oh my God, so many people. I'm gonna throw it over to somebody who, when I say wouldn't be here without Mel, that is true. I also wouldn't be here without Aaron Leitner. So I'm gonna throw it over to Aaron.
Thank you, David. Well, it's very emotional to see so many people from different stages of my life and in Young Judaea. Of course, both David and Amy were chanichim of mine, so that's great nachas to see you guys there. And but Mel, I've known as a chanich. Mel, I've known as someone I worked with in New Jersey, Young Judaea, someone who I taught with for 4 years, a friend, an inspiration, someone who killed me in racquetball. I hated that. As a matter of fact, just a few years ago, I got up the nerve to challenge Mel for a rematch at racquetball, but he wasn't quite up to it at that point. When I think of how Mel affected my life, it's just hard to know where to begin. I mean, I think my first impression of Mel as a chanich at Tel Yehuda was the Jesus Sikha. I'm like, who the hell is this guy? It was like so amazing. I'm like, wow, that was the beginning of a long-term relationship of inspirations of how to teach, how to project love to children. Mel always felt that the most important thing was dugma ishit as an educator and showing love, because he believed that was what would inspire future generations to have their strong Jewish identity at the source. He taught shtick, as many people have said already, to be bombastic, to wake people up. He did it in his Hebrew, whether it was the amazing curse words that I learned from Mel before I lived in Israel. It was the way he led by personal example. In the Hebrew school, charity was a big thing. Social action, even for the kids, was a big thing. Eli spoke about Ethiopian Jewry, but in the Hebrew school also, he used to arrange for the kids to go sing in the nursing homes in the area, to do fundraising for all kinds of causes, to write to children in the Soviet Union of refuseniks. He was always trying to inspire action, deeds, Jewish values, and through that, the love of Judaism, the identity, and Israel. So it's a sad day today. Mel, really to the end, was lucid. I would go see him once in a while in Jerusalem, would talk to him on the phone. And every time he would say, fuck you, Aaron, I knew he was okay. And it's hard to accept that he's not with us, but as others have said too, our actions and how we are and what we've done and what we will still do and what our children will do will be his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, so much. I'm gonna call on a Huva, Tal Hollander. Hello. You're on.
Okay, wonderful.
All good.
Oh, thank you, David, so much. I don't know if you remember me. I'm Galit and Karen's mother. My last name used to be Schuler. I changed it to my maiden name after we got divorced. I just want to say that I met Mel in 1973 when he came to be the principal of the Livingston Bnei Abraham School, Hebrew school. I was there already 10 years before, and I know that I was his favorite teacher. Mel was an incredible director, an incredible boss, never felt anything but support from him. And I went through a very hard time, and he was so there for me. I don't think I was only his favorite teacher, but his favorite person. And just the summer before he came, we met him, and I brought my daughters, and Galit was about 12 and a half. And he said to her, "What are you doing this summer?" And she said, "I'm going to visit my grandparents in Israel." And he said to her, "Next year, you are in Tel Yehuda." And I said, "For sure." And Galit became a very active young Judean. She was president. She went on not year course, but Madrichei Chutz Laaretz. She was on Ktura. Later on, 5 years later, Keren went on year course, I think with you, David, no?
You're behind me, but
A
close.
year behind you, okay. And she also was extremely active. And I want to thank Mel, because my daughters would have not been the same had they not been with Mel and with Young Judea. I was an ardent educator, but I could have not done it without Mel. Impossible, and without Young Judea. I thank him so much, because the way Galit raised and David raised their children was with Mel in mind. He was whispering in their ears. And my grandson served in the Israeli army for 3 years in the Totchanim. That wouldn't have happened had he not grown in their home. So, and I'm sure there are 500,000, 10,000 of stories like that. And so, as sad as I am today, I don't think that we will not miss him, because he'll be forever in our hearts and minds. Toda rabba, thank you so very much for letting me speak. I usually can't speak very well, but today it just came out.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ahuva, so much. And my love to the girls, to everybody. Thank you. One of the conversations I hear in my head right now is conversation between Mel and Lori Ruskin. I can hear it now. It wasn't always a soft conversation, but a lot of conversation. So I want to, again, one of those people I wouldn't be me without. I want to turn things to my friend Lori Ruskin.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to briefly reiterate that as someone that was thrown into the Mel world, and it went on for, you know, some, I don't know, over 10 years maybe, and working with him as one of, I guess, as Daron said, that, you know, technically, you know, when I was education director in Rosh Machanet, technically, you know, Mel reported to us, although we never followed those kind of things, obviously. And it was always the other way around. But our role was to figure out what it was that Mel was why he was doing what he was doing. Everything that Mel did, and this is what always overwhelmed me, everything he did had an educational purpose to it. He just never articulated it. And over the years, I know that you strive to really become a translator of how to translate. How many ways can you translate "fuck you" into English? You know, no, we don't do that because this is the reason, and so on and so on. But that was, the lessons were overwhelming. There was one time in my favorite Mel story, which I think he may have lost the purpose a little bit, but although I doubt it, I think it's on me. I think that I just don't understand what it was. And that was when he got up in front of the Beit Am for another Ulpan Oneg. And of course, Mel didn't just want to start the Oneg, he had to explain everything because it was all going to be in Hebrew. So he wanted to do a brief introduction. And his brief introduction sometimes went on to about 20 minutes. And there was one time he was in the middle and he was passionate and he was talking and he was explaining. And of course, the right arm was up there suspended in midair. And all of a sudden, someone in the Beit Am had the audacity to sneeze. I believe it was Laura Blaskett. If anyone knows Laura Blaskett, she doesn't do anything quietly. So it was a huge, you know, a chew. And Mel, with his arm in the air, stopped. And everyone in the Beit Am got quiet. And he stopped and he said, "What was that?" And all of a sudden there were little murmurings from the Hanichim up front. They would softly yell out, "Sneeze, sneeze." But you know, he can't hear. He can't see, he can't hear. And he yelled out, "What?" And from the scenery, from behind one of the artificial trees, the head of his Madrocha, Karen Green, peeked over and she yelled out, "Sneeze, Mel!" It was a sneeze. And again, with the arm was still in the air and the head was at its side, he said, "That's just my point." And then he went on to finish the introduction. And I'm not sure to this day what the hell he was talking about, what the point was, but I had to run out of the Beit Am because I was hysterical, only to be met there by Andy Meisels, who also ran out of the Beit Am because she was hysterical. So to Mel, the lessons were never lost. They will always be inside all of us. And those of us who had the opportunity to work with him year after year after year, what a wonderful, wonderful thing to take away. Thank you to the Reisfield family. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Lori. I'm going to actually call on just one more person as we get to the 3 o'clock hour here. And I see Susan Fooled. It's yours.
Hi. Well, I feel so honored. First of all, thank you for this. I met Mel when I was 9 years old when we moved to Fort Lee. And I attribute so much of who like most people have said, who I am and what I became from the lessons that he taught us. But I have one funny story. Mel loved jokes and pranks, and I was a real goody-good. But one day in Ulpan, we decided to prank him. We were learning, learning the reflexive binyan, and we decided when we went back to our bunks that we would make up a word. And we sat and conjugated it. We put it in our class notes from the day before. We even told different people in camp about it so that if he asked them, they would say, sure. 50 years later, I still remember that word. We got to class the next day and we used it in a sentence. And he said, what word? What is this? Mel, hit naher. He said, there's no such word. And we insisted there was. We showed him how we conjugated it. We told him what it meant. And finally, he found out that, of course, it wasn't really a word. He knew that all along. But it was sort of our goody-good way of tricking him. And then ultimately, the joke was on us because we learned how to conjugate the hitpayel verbs. I'll always remember Mel and his influence. And thank you for letting us relive this and see familiar faces. It was very special.
Thank you, Susan, so much for those words. I can't remember how to conjugate it all. I hope there's a video somewhere of Mel to teach me how to conjugate. I'm gonna actually give the final word, and then I'll say a few words to wrap up to somebody I haven't seen in a million years. Hello, Chagai Shmueli. You need to go off mute. Okay, there we go, Chagai.
Hi, David. It's good to see you for quite a while. I'll end this wonderful evening by telling a little story. I'll make it short. I got to America as a Sofim Shaliach in 1983 in the summer, and I was taken immediately to Tel Yehuda to check and see what Young Judaea is all about. I was taken there. I went to Aleph, to Cheder Ochel. I saw the phenomenon in action, and I already understood that there is something to it. 3 months later, Mel invited us, the new shlichim, to his home trying to figure out who we are and if we stand up to his standards. So we came together. I came by myself. He was waiting for me in the driveway, and he introduced himself. Shalom, ani Moshe Sdei Orez. Who are you? Said, I'm Chagai. He said, yeah, there's a test before you get in. He said, what's the test? He said, you give me now 5 synonyms for the word gaguim in Hebrew. Little did he know, I gave him. That opened for me the world of Mel Reisfield to get to his heart. From that moment on, he reminded me every time that I'm the one who knew 5 synonyms for gaguim. And now that he's gone, I'm left with 5 words for gaguim. And I think that this is what we're left with. So I still have much gaguim for him with many synonyms. And I miss you, Mel. I will always miss you. And be well. Thanks for being yourself. Good night.
Thank you, Chagai. I don't know if we're gonna go now to anybody else from the family. It's late in Israel. I want to, as I'm just waiting to find out, I just want to thank everybody for being here. And I could talk to half of you. I could talk to for the next 6 hours. The other half I'd like to get to know.
David, I always would tease him for it's Gil. For being a crier and for being a crybaby. He would have been crying throughout this entire call from the second it started until the very end. Thank you all for loving him, for letting him know. He knew he was loved by all of you and loved you back. And just thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you, Gil. I started off by talking about the first time I met Mel was at Gil's bar mitzvah. So a fitting way to end. We'll see you, I hope, in Barryville, in Jerusalem, in New York, wherever. As so many people have articulated today, we are who we are, not just as individuals, but as a young Judaic community because of Mel. And our plan is, as it always is simply forward together. So please be healthy and be safe until we can all be together again. We love you. Good night.